Newtonian classical physics uh, kind of helps you to understand how motion is supposed to be understood, and position, and particles and so on. If you have an accurate understanding of the position of particles and the momentum of particles and so on and so forth, you can predict what might happen 100 years from now, because you are living in a deterministic universe.
Right.
So everything is, determined by the laws of nature or the laws of physics and so on. All you have to do is really to figure out how the position and the momentum of particles, how they actually kind of work in sync and so on, and you are off to go. Of course, this kind of promise has been completely frustrated when Einstein actually introduced his view, and there are so many complicated things when it comes to special relativity theory and general relativity theory and so on. That really completely changed our understanding of the world. But then in that mix, we have this quantum physics that's really telling us that the universe is not deterministic. The universe actually behaves on probabilistic laws, and there's nothing preset, predetermined. And so the Newtonian picture now looks very, very unsatisfying and so on. And quantum physics actually frustrates the fundamental assumptions of physicalism, if you like.
Okay, everyone. Welcome again to the Kirkwood Center podcast for Theology and Ethics. My name is Anthony Costello. I have a special guest today, Dr. Mihretu Guta, professor of philosophy of mind and philosophy of neuroscience at Biola University Talbot School of Theology, where I also went. And it's a real pleasure because I ran into Mihretu after maybe a few years. We hadn't seen each other, and I was sitting at the library at Talbot a few weeks ago, and we ran into each other and wound up having quite a long discussion, probably about almost an hour and a half or 2 hours, talking about a variety of topics. But one topic that I really wanted to do more on with Mihretu, especially, was the doctrine, the philosophical doctrine, we might say, of physicalism. And we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about some of the research and things that Mihretu has been seeing in the realm of artificial intelligence and AI. So we kind of got a double topic for today. We're going to start with the physicalism as an ontology, and how there seems to be indications perhaps that view of reality is waning, if not maybe already dead. I don't know. We'll see. And then we'll end with some of Mihretu's insights and concerns about artificial intelligence, and maybe how Christians should sort of embrace or brace for the AI that's coming down, or that's already with us as well. So Mihretu, thank you for joining the podcast today. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. And maybe before we begin with the actual issues of the day, just give our audience a little bit of your personal background, where you're from, what your studies have been in, and where you're teaching at right now.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be on your show this morning. And my name is, as Tony introduced, Mihretu Guta. Originally, I'm from Ethiopia, so I have lived in US for quite some time now. And I went to UK to do my PhD at University of Durham, followed by my postdoctoral research at the same university. And I did specialize in philosophy of mind and metaphysics and consciousness studies. My postdoc was focused on consciousness studies, especially focusing on the nature of phenomenal consciousness, and especially given kind of a special emphasis on the origin question. Where does consciousness actually come from? What's the role of the brain in terms of helping us or not helping us in our effort to understand the origin question? So I integrated 4 different kind of categories, and philosophy and science. I looked into philosophy of mind, metaphysics from the philosophy side, and neuroscience, and a little bit of quantum physics from the science side. So I brought this to kind of four different categories and domains, science and philosophy, and I tried to kind of do some thinking about it. And so I'll be happy to say something about it if we get time later on. So currently I teach at Biola University. I also teach at Azusa Pacific Universities, the two universities, and yeah, it has been a very enjoyable ride so far, and I absolutely enjoy teaching. And so that's in a nutshell my background, and I absolutely love teaching. And crazy reader, I read a lot of books.
Yeah.
Almost it's like oxygen for me.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
agree.
so
I
guilty.
know. Yeah, that
I
was
feel so
when we
guilty when I don't read.
when we started having our spontaneous conversation a couple weeks ago, and it was clear that we could have sat there for several more hours and
Don't get me started. Yeah.
okay, you
So
started.
once, yeah.
Well, let's get you started a little bit, at least on one issue that you, because this is an issue that obviously this is an ontology, this is an ontological view of fundamental reality, is that everything is physical. And obviously that would relate to anything that has to do with the idea of mind or consciousness. And this, I only have a very rudimentary understand. I've read some of the books that were sort of prescribed to us in the class I took with J.P. Moreland at Talbot on philosophy of mind. And, we read certainly some books by the Churchlands and other sort of reductive physicalists who would reduce consciousness to the brain and brain states. But, in the conversation we had in the library, so maybe what we'll start is, why don't you, since, this is your field, maybe give us a definition of physicalism. Okay. And then maybe we'll go a little bit into how that relates to mind. Let's just start with that.
Yeah. Okay. So defining physicalism is a little bit challenging. And at the same time, it's a little bit of easy, broadly speaking. You can say what it is, but everyone is really not kind of in sync when it comes to how to characterize physicalism. But in general, physicalism, from the way it sounds, is to understand human ontology. By human ontology, I mean what it means for me, a certain kind of being or entity, in terms of me being purely and thoroughly physical being. So I do not have anything that's non-physical, and I do not have, for example, soul, or precisely speaking, I am not a soul. I'm just a physical system, complicated physical system, because the way my body is configured is very complicated, and my physiology is very, very complicated. My neurobiology is very, very complicated. But at the end of the day, after all is said and done, I am just a purely physical being. Well, physicalism comes in so many different dresses and shapes and sizes, like figures in geometry. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but in a nutshell, the bigger picture is that in whatever form you are being described or characterized, at the end of the day, you are just a physical system. But the problem is, exactly do we mean when we say X is physical?
Yeah.
What does that entail? Well, I mean, if you start with Descartes, you can just simply say that physical systems or a physical object extends in space and it takes up the space. And so it's observable, you can just see it. Doesn't mean that everything is observable, even if it's physical. If you take
Mm-hmm.
electron, for example, chemists or scientists do not have a direct access to electrons. They have never observed directly electrons or atoms and so on. But we do have atomic theory, right? So, and that theory helps us to predict certain things about the things that are around us. And based on that, we can just simply infer that, electrons exist and atoms are real things and so on. So when you take physicalism with respect to us human beings, it starts with the fundamental intuition, and the intuition is a little bit of difficult to spell out here, because people do not have intuition. Like the majority of people do not have intuition that they are purely physical beings. I mean, as JP has argued and has written for a number of years and so on, kind of across the board, it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not. It doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. I mean, just the default position is that, well, there is something, that goes beyond and above.
Right.
This
I'm
body.
something in this physical body. Right.
Right.
I mean,
It's just
unless you're Peter Van Ingwagen, because I do recall in his book on metaphysics, apparently he feels like he is a body, but I think that's probably not the view he had when he was an 18-year-old undergrad student. That
well,
probably
I mean,
came to that later.
we can talk about Peter Van Wagen's view if you like
Yeah,
later
we
on. But
will
Peter Van
later,
Wagen
but I just had to put
still
that in
sticks,
there.
he sticks to his gun still. So he still thinks that he's an animal. So
but
I
in
think
general, the intuition is
the default position is not physicalism. The default position is like the spirit world is real, and I am non-physical in some sense. For example, when people die in so many cultures, they have these rituals that really indicate and clearly show you that people are really kind of treating the dead body differently than what they actually assumed left that dead body, and so on. So the default position is not physicalism. So if the default position is not physicalism, we have to literally train ourselves to be physicalists. We have to kind of remind ourselves that our default position is not physicalism. It's just like learning a new language. So when you learn a new language, you're always kind of thinking about the syntax. When you're always kind of worrying about how to put words together and so on. When you're fluent in that language, and when that language is, let's say, your native language and so on, just everything comes out. You don't even think about syntax and so on. Sometimes actually native speakers are actually they make serious mistakes when it comes to grammar and blah blah blah, especially when they write and so on. They speak very fluently and so on. So physicalism, you would have to train yourself if it's not the default position. But why would you need to train yourself if physicalism is not the default position? Well, that takes us to science. That takes us to worldview, right? So people have a certain conception of the world based on what scientific theories actually dictate that the physical world comes down to. So let's take, for example, Newtonian classical physics. Newtonian classical physics kind of helps you to understand how motion is supposed to be understood, and position, and particles and so on. If you have an accurate understanding of the position of particles and the momentum of particles and so on and so forth, you can predict what might happen 100 years from now, because you are living in a deterministic universe. So everything is determined by the laws of nature or the laws of physics and so on. All you have to do is really to figure out how the position and the momentum of particles, how they actually kind of work in sync and so on, and you are off to go. Of course, this kind of promise has been completely frustrated when Einstein actually introduced his view, and there are so many complicated things when it comes to special relativity theory and general relativity theory and so on. That really completely changed our understanding of the world. But then in that mix, we have this quantum physics that's really telling us that the universe is not deterministic. The universe actually behaves on probabilistic laws, and there's nothing preset, predetermined. And so the Newtonian picture now looks very, very unsatisfying and so on. And quantum physics actually frustrates the fundamental assumptions of physicalism, if you like. So in a nutshell, physicalism simply defines you and me as purely physical beings and so on. Well, in philosophy of mind, people started when they adopted a certain picture of scientific world. And based on that, after they developed a worldview that everything is physical. So physical means something that's scientifically studiable. We can study scientifically, we can manage scientifically, we can figure out the inner working of a certain system on the basis of scientific theories and so on. Everything has to be observable in principle and objectively assessed and so on and so forth. So when it comes to a certain conception of human ontology, let's say the opposite of physicalism, let's say dualism of some kind, let's say substance dualism and so on. The conundrum is, what are you supposed to do with the soul? Soul is not visible. You can't touch it. You can't put it on a table. You can't study it. Lab is irrelevant to have any understanding of the ontology of the soul. So what's the best route to get rid of that? Just I assume that it doesn't exist because science has no access to it. Science can't do nothing about it. It can't give us any insight and so on. So I think we can talk about this later on, but here's it. So we start with identity theory. So one of the 1950s, a very much hyped view of a physicalist view is called identity theory. So identity theory, from the way it sounds, identifies you with a physical object. Or if you have properties, let's say mental properties, those properties are literally the same thing as neurons firing inside your brain, which means they are identical with brain states. So it started with that, and that view actually faced a number of difficulties. And maybe I should really stop here because I'm going to go, listing all these major views, but we can pick it up.
So there. I'll just try. Okay, so so you have, and of course this, this would sort of map along with the rise of contemporary science, and we would think of people like Francis Bacon, maybe going far as Francis Bacon, the idea that if we can observe it, if we can test it, if we can put it on the lab table, then there's almost this hopefulness that we can analyze all of the fundamental constituents of reality and sort of almost predict with great accuracy. I mean, you would have to be able to observe every single thing under every condition, and maybe that's the hard part. But in principle, it would be possible to sort of map out the entire future of this closed physical system, right? And that sort of view gets sort of becomes somewhat dominant, maybe in the West, especially, even though it's not very commonsensical, right? It doesn't really map. It doesn't really jive well with the intuitions that seem to be universal across time and culture, right? But it is sort of this one story of Western thinking. Maybe not Western, but we'll say Western European, Enlightenment thinking. Is that
actually, you're not wrong in saying that, because that's the kind of a great emphasis that we have given to physicalism. Well, it started with scientific revolution, right, in 17th century, and 17th century, people really started questioning the authority of the church and tradition and the authority of the scriptures and so on. So they really said that reason has to reign. Reason is exactly what we need to appeal to. In other words, that we have to stand on our own feet and figure things out. We shouldn't be we shouldn't be under the authority of anything. So people believe that really kind of boosted the enthusiasm level of the scientific advancements that we are witnessing in our time, because people really kind of disentangled themselves from these shackles, the shackles of we have to listen what the scriptures say, and now we're free,
and metaphysics.
Exactly. Exactly. So well, look, I don't think tradition or scriptures or all of those things can kind of stand in the way of science. But there are so many misunderstandings, because if you look at Galileo and how he had been treated by Catholic Church, and because of his kind of a endorsement of Copernican conception of the universe, where the world is heliocentric as opposed to geocentric. Actually, there are so many things attached to that, and he didn't come out, kind of forcefully say that, Copernican conception of the universe is the way to go. But anyway, in any way, he expressed his view, his sympathy, and his kind of commitment to endorsing Copernican view of the conception of the world, that really put him in a very difficult position, right? So he stayed in house arrest and so on and so forth. And there are so many things attached to that story, but nonetheless, many people say
we
that,
have a
look,
separate podcast on Galileo with James Ungurianu, who's a historian of philosophy. So yeah, that's something to people certainly be aware of that story. Yeah,
people use that as an excuse to say that you see, like people, Christians or churches are against science and blah, blah. You know, they can use that as an excuse sometimes to kind of present a kind of a distorted view of the fact that the scriptures actually are compatible in most cases with what scientific theories actually say. And people like, Hugh Ross and Reasons to Believe, for example, that's what they do, like, right? So to show the compatibility between science and what the scriptures actually say. So I think everything boils down to the issue of worldview now, because
the philosophical view. Yeah,
exactly, a certain way of understanding your own nature in relation to what these theories are saying and so on. So science is being understood as an objective kind of a domain of human inquiry and unadulterated, and it gives us a precise understanding of our nature and so on. But physicalism, the identity theory is in trouble. I'll mention that later on. And it comes kind of I don't know, type identity would be strictly identifying mental properties with physical properties. And that run into all sorts of problems because
who were some of the main philosophers? I probably will recall, I can't recall all the names in the 50s and 60s who were trying to do this reductionistic move of taking every mental phenomena and trying to show a one-to-one correspondence to some physical state, right? So who were some of the folks who would be?
So Australian philosopher, for example, JJ, C. Smart, he published Sensations, a paper on sensations and behavior and so on, and he actually introduced the identity theory kind of official level. And people took off from there. For example, UT Place published an article says, "Is consciousness a brain process?" for example, in the 1950s and so on. And David Armstrong, for example, argued for some version of identity theory as well. So there were so many people back in 1950s. And Jürgen Kim, for example, until he died recently, he defended, reductive physicalism, and as was identity theory. So his was not even qualified, and identity theory in a sense that other people had defended back in 1950s, with so many modifications and so many other views came up. Functionalism as an option, behaviorism as an option, and so on, and fictionalism as an option, even eliminativism as an option, completely eliminating not only the soul but also mental states altogether, in the case of Paul Churchland, for example. So I think physicalism in general, in a nutshell, broadly speaking, without getting into all sorts of complicated issues, is literally an attempt to understand your own being as a physical being, configured in a complicated way, but you're not. There's nothing about you that is somehow ontologically non-physical, such that when you, for example, die, you survive, your physical death, because you are ontologically like a combination of two different things, matter and something that's not matter as we know it.
Right. Okay. So yeah, we mentioned several. I remember several of those books. Reading some the Churchland book, Kim's book, Physicalism, or something close to it. I think
Near enough.
And so all of these these are various types of identity theories, whereby they're trying to work out how to explain away mental phenomena as physical states of the brain, I suppose, too. I mean, it's that's the organ that's kind of in question. And of course, extrapolating from that, everything else is physical as well, right? I mean, So, I mean, so you mentioned that, okay, because one thing is we're living in a scientific society, or we have a certain conception of science, and we're sort of asserting that science is objective. Other things are not. Other domains of knowledge are not. It's through science that we get real knowledge, and we won't get into that broader discussion of ontology and epistemology per se. But so the idea is presuppose physicalism, then try and show how we can reduce human consciousness down to the purely physical. Now, one maybe advantage of that, and I don't know if you want to expound this, is, well, it's a simpler theory, right? I mean, we hear this, right? Occam's razor. Then we only have also in our ontology one kind of thing that we have to deal with, and isn't that nicer than having some other very different kind of thing? So I don't know. Do you want to say anything about that sort
Yes.
of postulate? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a big reservations when it comes to Occam's razor principle, which has been embraced almost universally among the philosophical
Or
community.
William of Ockham. I
Also,
don't know if he would have taken. Yeah,
right,
but yeah.
right. So in some scientific communities as well. So in general, okay, we can grant that the less kind of complicated, more a straightforward view about something is more preferable than something that's convoluted and unnecessarily complicated with unnecessary uh, overpopulated entities and so on. Okay, let's grant that at the broader level. But look, reality uh, is not contingent on how you expect reality should be like. Look, what actually dictates what should regulate, what kind of conclusion you draw about something, has nothing to do how you expect reality should be like. It's completely independent of whatever you think about that reality. Okay. If reality is complicated in and of itself to begin with, from the get go, so be it. And it's the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the Occam's razor often is invoked to get away an easy way. Oh, look, mine is neater and
Yeah.
very precise, and
Elegant.
I don't have to think about
Yeah.
consciousness, about phenomenology and the
Right.
problems that phenomenology poses to me. I can just simply say it's a brain state, and we don't know yet how it is a brain state, but it is. Therefore, let's go ahead and figure how that thing
Yeah.
is. You see how you can, in a cheap way almost, you can avoid the elephant in the room.
Mm.
By avoid elephant in the room, you leave the elephant in the room and you pretend that the elephant in the room is out of that room. You pretend because you invoke this law, this principle.
Yeah.
But the elephant in the room comfortably is there.
Yeah. It
But then
doesn't go
you
away.
you really
Really go away. Yeah.
comfortably there. You treat the surface level symptoms. It's sort of like touching the tip of the iceberg, but it's submerged underneath. You know, so
Yeah.
this principle can easily be misused, misapplied, and so on. My critique of this principle is this: if reality is complicated, we shouldn't apply Occam's razor, period. Go ahead and deal with the reality.
Mm-hmm.
Try to come up with a model or with a way to handle it, properly understand the nature of that problem. And if you can't solve it, then don't come up with a cheap solution.
Yeah.
So Occam's razor has a place. It can play a very good role in
Mm-hmm.
some situations, but it shouldn't be applied universally. If
Yeah.
reality is complicated, it's complicated, period. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you have, by the way, the simplest view relative to my view, it doesn't mean that your view is better than my view. It's a circus show. It means like, oh, you can excite people with your view. Mine is honest to the situation I'm dealing with. I'm not coming up with a cheap solution. I'm just dealing with this problem. I don't have to solve it if it's difficult for me to solve. If I don't have enough resources, I have to be patient and keep on working on that problem.
Yeah.
But then this law, this principle is often invoked. You see, physicalism is neat. It doesn't posit soul. It doesn't posit mental states. It's neater, cleaner version. It only talks about one entity, one property, end of the game. You see?
Yeah.
Come to dualism, soul, mental states, brain states, and brain itself. It's just overproduction of this, overpopulating this scene and so on. Therefore,
populating the universe with
dualism is very
unnecessary
complicated. So
yeah, right. No,
I don't buy that principle in general. So
yeah, well, and I'm always skeptical. It's because it seems to be such a something that motivates so many, right? It's like that principle is going to it's a bedrock thing, and it's got to determine everything else that you're going to put into your theory. And it just seems so yeah. Anyways, so yeah, I agree with that. So and I just see it used and wielded all the time. And like you said, I think it certainly has its right place. But if it's not doing if your theory is not doing the work of trying to really explain what we are encountering in day-to-day life, then it's sort of, it's being overused or abused. Right.
if you allow me, for
Yeah.
your listeners, let me give you one very clear example
Yeah.
so
Okay.
that they can
Good.
see. Take phenomenology. Phenomenology is a subjective experience you have. Let's say if you feel pain, pain hurts, and it makes you uncomfortable and so on. How do you actually know that pain hurts? You know pain hurts from your own first person perspective because you can introspect your own internal states. I cannot feel your pain, no matter how much
Mm-hmm.
sympathetic I am with respect to what you're actually undergoing. I'm not going to be able to tell you the quality of that pain. That's exclusively yours and can only be known by you. Okay, take this introspective capacity that we have from our own first person perspective and so on. If you take philosophers like Churchland would say, no, no, no. There's pains do not have this quality that we call hurtfulness. They hurt in their
Yeah.
hurtfulness. He says that, look, that's a kind of a thought psychology. It's a common sense based psychology. That's how you commonsensically understand your own pain
Right.
experience. And he says, look, scientifically that's not accessible. So science doesn't recognize that, and so can get rid of that. Eliminate that completely, not reduce, eliminate it completely because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Why do you then believe? Because it's the problem of the common sense, folk
Yeah.
psychology, and so on. Daniel Dennett also has this
Yeah.
heterophenomenology. It's a methodology where he introduced where you can reduce first person subjective experiences to third person analyses of those experiences. In doing so, you can get rid of the subjective phenomenological experiences and hop on this scientifically based analysis of brain states and so on, so on, and so forth. My point is this. If you take Occam's razor, you avoided all of these kind of explanations that you would have been required to get first person perspective, introspection, heartfulness, and so on and so forth. You bypass all of that. What is pain? Let's say C fiber firing. So certain neurons passing from one neuron to the second, next neuron, electrical currents, and then neurotransmitters and so on. Done. That's so you don't have to talk about first person perspective and so on and so on. You don't have to engage in all of these ontologies. But here's my question for you and for your listeners. What difference would that make to your experience of pain? Do you think pain all of a sudden goes away because you have that theoretical
No.
analysis of it?
Yeah.
Oh, I have been kidding. My
Yeah.
headache, it wasn't a headache. I just actually, I haven't been feeling that my
Right.
headache, and
Right.
it didn't feel the way I thought it felt, and so on. Nothing changes. Nothing. So now you are entitled to ask why. Why did it? Why was it that nothing did actually change? So you need to start questioning the view that is
Explanation.
telling you or trying to convince you otherwise. You are entitled to do that, and you should do that. And that's exactly where you start feeling unsatisfied, because the view is not helping you to understand what seems to be absolutely obvious from your own phenomenological standpoint. And
Yeah.
theoretically denying that and making this gymnastics and invoking that Occam's razor principle changes literally not an
Nothing.
iota, nothing.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean
that's
yeah.
why we should be very skeptical of this cheap way of invoking this principle and say, well, we can get away with that. No, we can't.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, and I'll share some, not with a great detail, but some a personal story that I think highlights. I mean, and I was reading a lot, maybe of the physicalist literature in or around this time or shortly before. So it was more in my uh, immediate consciousness at that time. But this was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I went through a horrible personal experience. But it was emotional pain. It was utterly physically I was fine. I was not, there was nothing there wasn't I wasn't dealing with migraine headaches. I didn't lose my leg. I wasn't, it wasn't anything physical, but we have emotional pains. Relationships break down. People die. You miss friends. I mean, and it just, I was waking up in the middle of the night, and these cold sweats, and I was sleeping in a very nice bed. The temperature in the room was comfortable, but you're waking up because you're having these purely these emotional experiences. And it just struck me. I'm like, clearly, I'm not just my body. My soul is in pain, and it's affecting my body. Right. And it just, and there was no third person explanation that of my brain states that was going to have any effect on the emotional suffering that I or anybody else who goes through things like that is going to change. Right. You could give me all kinds of descriptions of what my brain is doing in those moments. It's not, once I hear them or become aware of those explanations, it's going to do nothing to stop me from having this intense emotional struggle, or pain. So yeah, it just, anyways, I think we all know that. Like, we all know that. Okay, so we mentioned identity theory. You mentioned some of the problems that are emerged that they can't be answered. Of course, we probably won't go into the problem of freedom, of human freedom, which would be another problem to deal with. That very strong reductionistic type of view is going to struggle with, the problem of human freedom, culpability for our actions, and so determinism, and so on and so forth. But where are you seeing, you mentioned to me that you had attended I think a conference on physics not too long ago. And so where are there other challenges coming into this idea that everything's just physical? I mean, it's not just from philosophy, I think, right?
Yes. Last April, I was at the University of Arizona, where I presented a paper at the world's largest consciousness conference, or the Science of Consciousness. It happens every single year, once in the United States and once outside of the United States. So next year it will be in Barcelona and so on. So, people like David Chalmers
Yeah.
started this, you know, uh, kind of sort of like a yearly conference on the science of consciousness way back in 1994, if I'm not mistaken. Ever since, it has been happening, every single year. So I was struck at that conference. A very prominent neuroscientist, I think his name is Christoph Koch. I think it's a German name that I
Mhm.
don't know how to pronounce the second name. He actually worked with Francis Crick, the DNA double helix discoverer, co-discoverer. And during his presentation, he actually said that he used to be very sympathetic when it comes to physicalism, and he actually defended physicalism and so on. And he said that classical physicalism is completely explanatorily incapable of helping us to understand, our own nature and so on and so forth. And he said that he is more sympathetic now to some form of idealism. And he encouraged all of us, hundreds of scientists and philosophers at the time. He said that we should be opening ourselves up to stories of the one that you actually shared with me, like people's stories and stories about the death experience and what happened in their lives and when they experienced sorrow and so on and so forth. We shouldn't discard all of these things by the name of science and objectivity and so on. It's time for us to be able to accommodate these stories. It's time for us to opening ourselves up, looking into these stories carefully and so on, reading the books written in these areas and so forth. I literally couldn't believe my ears when I was listening to this. Which means it gave me some sort of hope that the pendulum is now swinging to the other side, and people have begun or beginning to understand that the purely physicalist picture of the world, is just not sustainable, because you just shared with me, during that crisis moment, you literally experienced everything in real time, right?
Yeah.
So if someone were to come alongside of you and say like, "Hey, you, Anthony, you're faking, this is you're hallucinating and you're being paranoid," and nothing actually would have convinced you, because that's absolutely real and it's your experience, and no one can put himself or herself in your shoes exactly to experience the way you experienced those things. So therefore, people are beginning to understand that, by the way. And some people are actually moving away from identity physicalism or functionalist understanding of human brain, or behaviorism is almost, I can say, is dead. No one really takes
Yeah,
behaviorism
right. I
seriously.
mean, that seemed dead
Um,
maybe a while ago already. That
yeah,
kind of
yeah. So
generating.
so now people are beginning to understand the role of phenomenology, the role of experience. Subjective experience is so powerful because you cannot run away from your own shadows, right? The shadow will always follow you. It's you feel it in real time. It's real and obvious, and it changes your behavior, it changes your beliefs, and it's impossible for you to deny and act like it's illusion. It's just sort of, I can say that it's a Cartesian conundrum. And Descartes started by doubting everything. Let me doubt my body. Let me doubt my house. Let me doubt everything. Trees, nothing actually exists. And he hit a dead end. Well, who has been doubting all along? The doubter must be real. Therefore, I think, therefore I am. That Cartesian conundrum in a different way is now kind of a reckoning moment for so many people. They have been cynical about subjective experiences. They have been cynical about everything. Oh, neuroscience is going to unravel this mystery.
Gonna map
Neuroscience is going to do,
map everything
do
out.
this magic. Do this magic through imaging, techniques. For example, if you take functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, you can use that. You can peer into someone's brain. You can actually see the blood oxygenation dependency level, and then you can kind of cordon off a certain area in your brain. Oh, neurons are firing here. Something must be going on, and you can correlate concurrently with what that person is actually doing at that particular time. That says literally nothing about the content of your mental life. Correlation is neither identity nor causation. So, and if you take positron emission tomography or PET scan or something like that, and spectrum and other techniques, look, all of those things wouldn't really help you, neuroscientists, even one bit, if they don't engage with their subjects. The subjects have to tell them stories from their own first-person perspective, based on that neuroscientists kind of infer certain conclusions and so on. If the subjects are mute, if they don't really say anything, if they are not willing to tell you anything, you have no chance to say anything plausible on their behalf. Let's suppose I am having a headache, and you are a neuroscientist. You hooked my brain to those, imaging techniques, and I started like behaving in ways that I am not willing to cooperate. You ask me, how does it feel? Nothing. No response. Does this hurt? No response. Are you pleased? No response. I intentionally kind of decided not to say anything. What would you conclude about your research? Pack your things up and leave.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing you can do. So you measured my blood flow in a certain region. Then what? Have I been thinking about a cup? Have I been thinking about a cow? Have I been thinking about, let's say you've shown me an object. Let's say you've shown me an object. Okay, here is it, a coffee mug. Okay, you've shown me this. And you give me instructions what to think about this cup. Okay? So now you concurrently peer into my brain. And I give you that freedom. But then I can think about that cup in a million different ways.
Yeah.
Let's say I can say, oh, this cup is stupid. I don't like this cup. I completely ignore your instructions. Internally, I can entertain completely unrelated thoughts.
I could just think about an elephant instead, even without what you told me to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Or I can even make fun of you. Oh, how poor is this neuroscientist? He might think that I'm following his instructions. I can entertain any number of things. Yeah. Now, if I do not cooperate with you, if I do not want to follow your instructions, I can actually mislead you. I can tell you something totally untrue about the object that you've shown me with a set of instructions. I can do the exact opposite of that. And you might arrive at a conclusion that has nothing to do with what I have been entertaining when you give me that instructions, which I completely ignored. So you see, this tells you that how human beings are black boxes. I can actually say this to my students all the time. We are black holes, I can say sometimes. You can't reach to the center of the black hole. You have no chance. Even light cannot escape the black hole, the horizon, and so on. So light will be sucked in, and it's gone forever. So you have no chance to go to land at the center of a black hole and study the gravitational pull of that part of the object. So human beings are incredibly confusing entities, and they can really give you all sorts of problems if they want to. Mm-hmm. So this confidence that science is somehow has a key to unlock my inner thoughts, and I can be at the mercy of whatever the neuroscientists tell me, it's a completely implausible confidence in the science of neuroscience itself. So I think we should kind of get over this illusion. I think we have to come and embrace first person perspective. You have this capacity. No one can take that capacity away from you, and people have to depend on you for their own. That's in their own interest, by the way.
Yeah.
If neuroscientists want to give us a credible scientific analysis, they have to take people's stories very seriously. But unfortunately, physicalists or physicalistically minded neuroscientists are very cynical. They don't only simply deny pain, they just make fun of you. I mean, they just want to. They just want to make you accept whatever that they say. And I'm not willing to do that because I'm an authority over my own subjective experiences. Not a single person is an authority over my subjective experiences. I can grant you as a medical doctor or as a neuroscientist, I can recognize, I respect your expertise. But when you overstep your expertise, I am not going to listen to you. I will just treat you as if you're as ordinary as any person is. You are an ordinary person when it comes to my subjective experiences. That's how I see things.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's the perennial problem of the, and I don't, we say like the pounding of the square theoretical peg into the practical hole. And why do you keep trying to pound that theoretical peg into the hole? Is it an ego thing? Maybe you really are a true believer, but sometimes one thinks there are just other psychological and sociological factors going on as to why why someone is so dogmatic, or fears, right? I mean, there could be certain fears that people have because if, again, this side, and that seemed to come through in the Churchland book that we read, if I recall, him and his wife were both raised in very sort of fundamentalist Christian homes. And there almost seemed to come through this sort of like very cynical, sort of sardonic almost attitude towards anything substance dualistic, right? Be it from a Christian point of view or anything else, like, you know, people who might not be Christians or even but believe in souls and, you know, things like this. And there was sort of a mocking tone that this is all just, you know, stuff for the National Enquirer and sort of like silly kind of folk religion and folk belief, you know, and so I did detect, I think, especially in the Churchland's book, that I seem to detect that kind of attitude that didn't seem very scientific. You know, it was
No, look,
more personal attitude that they were taking with regards to anything that smacked of the possibility of consciousness being, you know, immaterial. All right.
I was about to show you a book written by Timothy Williamson. He's a very
Yep.
smart guy,
Oh
a
yeah,
British philosopher.
right.
He wrote a very kind of a small book in 2018 for a general audience where he talks about intuition, common sense, and so on. In that book, he says that, look, no one is immune to common sense. Philosophers and scientists, they simply pretend. In fact, most of the time they lie as if they are somehow like came from a different universe and a different planet, and they are going to tell us like a very unadulterated version of a certain view and so on. Look, every single day you live your life, any interaction you have with other human beings is for the most part based on common sense, based on folk psychology. Even Churchland and his wife, you know, they share everything we share, we human beings share, and they don't have a different experience. Pain's hurt for them as well. They scream, you know, when they run into some troubling situation health-wise and so on. But it looks on paper as if like everything is kind of falling apart. But look, your own philosophy wouldn't be rich enough, insightful enough when you turn your back against a lived out experience. It has nothing to do with like theory of some sort. If substance dualism is true, it's not because it's based on any theory whatsoever. It's just a non-theory based. It's a first datum, right?
Yeah.
But you can have a theory about it, but you cannot establish, substance dualism on the basis of theory because it's not theoretical. JP has got in his new book the substance of consciousness, for example, that came this year by Wiley.
Is that
The
the one
first
with
chapter,
Brandon Rickabaugh together?
yes,
Yeah, I haven't.
yes,
I want to get that one, but yeah,
yeah, you need to
really
get
nice.
that book. I actually
Yeah.
have my review essay of that book is coming with Philosophy Christi. I think
Okay.
probably in the fall. So what I want to say here is like there are so many things that really make us feel reserved, some of us actually, when it comes to physicalism, because physicalism is a denial of what seems to be extremely obvious. And you resist that because that's what is obvious in your day to day life. And that's how you engage with the environment around you and with other people as well. And science, look, has its own place. Science has its own place.
Mhm.
But always we have to remind ourselves that we're not answerable to any scientific theory when a scientific theory steps out of its bounds. I think you are entitled intellectually to challenge and intellectually to ask questions and to come up with objections and so on, as opposed to saying, "Oh, experts know everything, so my role is just
Right.
kind of to be helpless and simply,
Fall in line and and listen to
drink
the
and
experts. Right.
yeah, and take whatever that they say." No, I think human ontology is extremely based on common sense, and I think the default position, the fact that somehow people literally, for some reason, can't let this "I am not purely physical" kind of stuff that easily. They don't surrender that. Intellectually, they might surrender that. We can talk about Peter Van Wagen,
Well, let's
other
do that.
Christian
So,
physicalists or something like
I mean, okay, and then because I do want to get to the AI stuff, but I want to maybe we'll tie up this discussion on. And look, I would say like everything that I'm seeing, not just in the realm of philosophy of mind, but just you mentioned idealism earlier, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff coming out on idealism now, that reality is fundamentally consciousness or conscious. And look, there'll be problems for the Christian worldview with that, I think, although maybe idealism is more compatible than with a really strong physicalism. But still, there'll be problems with a sort of I don't want to say absolute idealism. That might sound like Hegel, but I'm thinking more of like Berkeley. And I've seen, and I don't know much about it, but I'm seeing more of that, and I'm just seeing like a greater willingness in a lot of literature to move away. And we see this in sort of we see this in what was already a fairly old challenge from continental philosophy against the more analytic strain of philosophy in the Anglo-speaking tradition, right? As well, the focus on the subject, focus on the phenomena, whether you go back to Husserl and then everybody after him as well, to the existentialists. So those challenges have been there, and I've read a lot of critical theory recently, and you get Horkheimer and Adorno, and they don't like the instrumental sort of reasoning that comes along with science. They don't want to reduce everything down to that as well. Of course, we have problems with them on other grounds, but so those critiques are there, and you have this sense in the popular culture as well. We're moving away from this idea that science can tell us everything, or at least this version of science, this strict sort of naturalistic, materialistic science where matter is, I would say, like matter's impersonal stuff, And again, and then this is where like we may have to do another podcast, because I think there are dangers with a sort of that we have to be aware of, and this may come up with the AI discussion. If we move into this realm of matter being very different than what we thought it was, but we're still sort of materialist, but matter being conscious, matter being alive somehow, and the fundamental constituents of reality themselves being sort of mental things. I mean, there's dangers with that as well. And maybe you want to make a brief comment on it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Very briefly, I think there is a view called panpsychism. So panpsychism has, we don't have to talk about the history of panpsychism, but panpsychism simply says that look, matter is proto-conscious. Consciousness is not something that's located in your brain and that's it. So there isn't a specific location; it's diffused throughout the universe and so on. So the configuration of matter is really important in giving rise to that phenomenon that we call consciousness. So if we know how matter is configured, the way matter is configured, let's say if we have a full knowledge of how the whole nervous system is configured, so you have let's say 100 billion neurons, each neuron makes at least 10,000 connections with the neighboring neuron. The total synapses inside your brain right now, 3-pound weighing organ, it exceeds 100 trillion connections. So that is really without adding glial cells that really support the whole structure. That glial cells are actually different from neurons themselves. They play a different kind of role and so on. All this ionic flow inside and outside of your cell, and electricity and neurotransmitters and proteins and blood and water, and the list goes on and on and on. All of these things are chaotically but in absolute harmony and sync. They work, and then now you and I are engaging like this. A lot is happening in our physiology. And now, okay, if we know how the configuration really happened, it's a piece of cake for us to show that the computer can also be conscious. And then the only problem is that we haven't yet figured out how this kind of thing plays out. And that's where the money has to go, and we have to do more research, and we will get there. We can talk about that, singularity and transhumanism and the rest. Panpsychism says physicalism is unsatisfying theory. So it's a response to the dissatisfaction with physicalism. But it has got its own problems, and one of the problems is this combinatorial problem. Configuration and so on. Well, where should we start so that consciousness will scoot out of this union and so on? I think it has got other problems as well, but I think the field is really in a little bit of shambles right now. Many people are moving away from physicalism. I think it's rightly so. And science cannot be objective. In fact, I have an article, by the way, I challenged scientific objectivity. There's no such thing as scientific objectivity. I'm not saying that everything shouldn't be trusted in science, but objectivity in a relativized sense. There's no pure absolute objectivity that we can actually attribute to science. And my article is Consciousness, First-Person Perspective, and Neuroimaging. It's published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. Okay. So I actually come up with a model, even to deny third-person perspective. There's no such thing as third-person perspective. There's only first-person perspective. Third-person perspective only exists in grammar, not in reality.
Yes.
It has no ontological category whatsoever.
That's
none.
Right. Yeah.
Only one perspective exists. That's first-person perspective. Second-person perspective does exist in grammar, not in ontology. I've made my remark. I'm reductionist when it comes to perspectives. There's only one perspective called first-person perspective.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Let's suppose you and I are scientists and we're approaching a certain problem. Your and my collaboration is called intersubjectivity. So we are collaborating on a certain issue. Well, we are collaborating not from the third-person perspective. There's no such thing. You are approaching the same problem. I am approaching the same problem from my own, you from your own first-person perspective. So the two perspectives can kind of coagulate, and they come and make this kind of networking. You are approaching from your own first-person perspective. I'm approaching from my own first-person perspective. We're studying this stuff, whatever, call it Q. Okay. Now, for you, what I am doing can be analyzed as follows. Guta is doing XYZ. When you use that language, Guta is doing XYZ, you're actually employing third-person perspective. Like someone is doing something. But the doer, himself or herself, is doing what he or she does from not third-person perspective, from first-person perspective. So the whole idea of this hyping and touting, science is based on third-person perspective is, technically speaking, it's false assertion.
Well,
and there's no such a thing.
Even my production of a third-person grammatical description of what you are doing is from is a first-person.
Exactly. That's exactly
my first-person perspective 100%. Of producing a third-person grammatical construct.
That's why I said to you, I want to make this very clear to your readers. I am not denying third-person perspective or second-person perspective when it comes to grammar. I'm denying it. None of these perspectives actually have this ontological basis. Right. There's only one fundamental perspective. That's called first-person perspective. That's based in the ontology of the self.
Okay.
So, if you take this assertion, the scientific objectivity makes very little sense. Anyway.
Okay. We're going to go a little bit over. Can you stick around?
It's okay. Yeah.
A little bit longer, because I was worried we were going to, but this is good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now let's, why do we have some Christians, and I just heard Nancy Murphy, yes, she was at ETS last year. Seems like, seems like a wonderful person and a very sort of almost moving keynote speech that she gave at ETS last year. Or Peter Van Ingwang, and I love his book on metaphysics. His intro is very good read. But I guess they're still very committed to being Christians and physicalists. So I don't know. Do you want to shed some light on maybe just those two figures who some of our audience might know?
First of all, I want to clear up some confusion when it comes to defending physicalism within the context of non-Christian environment and
Okay.
within the context of Christian environment.
Good. Okay.
So let's say if you take John Kim, he's a philosopher, he doesn't have any religious affiliation, or he's not a religious person, he doesn't believe, probably he's an atheist, and he was an atheist. Okay, when he defends physicalism, he doesn't accept so many things that Christian physicalists accept and incorporate within their physicalism. So we need to make this very, very clear. John Kim doesn't believe in resurrection, let's say, afterlife, let's say, and the rest that's associated with that commitment. So he thinks that he is or anyone is a purely physical being, and when you die, that's the end of the story. That's it. There's absolutely nothing that really will be left behind, or you don't transcend your own physical limitations by surviving physical death and so on. Okay, let's bracket aside that. So when it comes to Christian physicalists take the adjective Christian. What kind of physicalists are these? Christian physicalists. Okay, others are not non-Christian, non-religious, and so on. So Nancy Murphy totally accepts the non-physicality of brain states. Mental states, for example. She totally accepts, for example, brain states. She totally accepts future general resurrection that many, many Christians believe. In one sense, she believes that, yes, she would survive her physical death. How? Not by, let's say, the soul surviving that physical death, because she doesn't believe in soul. She's not ensouled. She is physicalist. My body is physical, and when I die, God somehow sustains my, I don't know, memory and everything that I've done during my lifetime and so on and so forth. He will bring it back, and he will unite all of those things with the future resurrected body. So in one sense, Christian physicalists might not believe the immediate survival of physical death, but let's say the intermittent, like there's a gap, there's interruption between your death and when the general resurrection will happen. Right. During that interim period, you ceased to exist. So there's nothing, because you're not soul. Okay. Right. So, but Christian physicalists do still accept, the central doctrines of the scriptures. This includes Trenton Merrickx. This includes another physicalist, Van Wagen. This includes another physicalist, Rader Becker and Lynn Rader Becker, and so on. So Christian physicalists also approach this problem in different ways. Let's say the way Trenton Merrickx, who's another Christian philosopher, approaches the physicality of human beings is different from the way Nancy Murphy approaches. Nancy Murphy tells you from the get-go, the scriptures actually do not recognize soul.
I remember
it's some kind of unfortunate concept introduced into scriptures through, let's say, mistranslation, or people imported from Greek philosophy and introduced it into scriptures, and that really.
I think Joel Green sort of defends that with the New Testament. I think it was New Testament scholar. Yes. Maybe it's an Old Testament scholar as well. But yeah, okay.
Right. So the reason why I'm saying this is there are so many complications even among Christian physicalists. Yeah. Trenton Merrickx often says, look, when I look at my face in the mirror and I see animal. So he kind of, that's my intuition. That's how I understand myself. I seem to be purely animal, and so on and so forth. And Van Wagen also says dualism is unnecessarily complicating things. Yeah. A neat version is I'm animal. That's how I see myself as, and so on. But Nancy Murphy tells you don't even have a scriptural basis to invoke the ontology of soul. And she gives you reasons why that's the case, and so on. And other Lean Becker, and they tell you about their general resurrection and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, there's nothing, that we have to hope for. So it seems like Christian physicalists are kind of speaking in these are double-minded to some extent. They just want to have the core promises that the scriptures actually give us, and on the other hand, their philosophical side pulls them in a different direction, and so on. So just you see this wobbleness, the kind of lack of stability within this community, like physicalist community, a small segment. But my worry is this: when I read the scriptures and the way I understand scriptures gives me a completely different story. I actually cannot bring myself to embracing physicalism on the basis of my reading of the scriptures. And in fact, the New Testament scholar Steve Brine at Trinity International University in Chicago and we co-presented a paper, at ETS last November in Texas, arguing that scriptures actually, kind of unapologetically presuppose some sort of a dualist understanding of human ontology and human nature. And then we are actually co-writing a paper, integrating New Testament and philosophy. So I think for me, I don't want to give you a kind of a proof text argument here, but a simple argument that without engaging in that, a simple argument. When Christ said that you will be with me today, to one of the pundits, let's take that. And also somewhere Christ said, like, fear those who can only kill your body, but don't fear those who can only kill your body, but fear he who can kill both your body and your soul, and so on. I just want to tell your readers that I'm not begging questions. I'm not really providing a proof text, but this is just an example, just kind of crude illustrations. If you take this at face value, just at face value, if you have a very good grasp of English, right? If you're reading English Bible, right? Not Amharic or something like that. This is not a rocket science. Christ, if he's not a substance dualist, you will have a very difficult time of convincing me that he's a physicalist, or what he said is really in sync with what physicalists are telling us about our own human nature. So Christ is 100% substance dualist in my view, and he's not shy about it. Now, Nancy's reasons are completely unfounded. I think they have been debunked by so many New Testament scholars and philosophers. I think the scriptures 100% presuppose and actually strongly entail, if you study OT or NT, some sort of dualist nature of human ontology.
Well, and you have other immaterial entities in scripture you'd have to get, not just God, but I mean, scriptures, every angel would have to be a metaphorical, type of literary construct. You can't have real angels. I mean, or you could have those, but then why would you just, then you're going to say, like, well, we have these other immaterial agentive beings that have moral natures, but human beings just aren't that, human beings can't be that way as well.
Let me say one thing, by way of helping your readers. The reason why certain Christian physicalists and also other people outside of the Christian community tend to embrace physicalism is literally their conception of science. For Nancy, she says neuroscience is going to actually settle the problem that we're facing when it comes to human nature. We know a lot about human brain, she says. So therefore, in light of what we actually have known so far, embracing the notion of the soul stuff and so on is deeply implausible. Let me tell you something. I read neuroscience a lot, and I teach philosophy of neuroscience myself, and so on. There's absolutely nothing. This is me speaking. The more you read neuroscience, the more you understand the different models that neuroscientists are putting out there. It gives you no hint whatsoever about the ontology of human beings. You can come away with a massive knowledge of how human brain works, ionic flow, and how they work, when they don't work, and so on. You can mathematically show that the ionic flow inside and outside of a cell, GHK, different kinds of calculations that you do. Yeah. We don't have to get into that. Look, it says absolutely nothing about mental states. And the methodologies that have been put out by so many neuroscientists just to tell us that how correlation somehow is going to, destabilize, the substance dualist understanding of human nature is really unfounded. So neuroscience has got its place, but neuroscience has very little, if at all, by way of debunking or destabilizing, the ontology of a human personhood. So we should take metaphysics very, very seriously. This is the territory of metaphysics. It's not the territory of your laboratory. In your lab, you cannot show me what my beliefs look like. You cannot show me what my desires look like. You have no data inside your laboratory. You have to engage with me, as I've said earlier, and you ask me certain questions. If I don't tell you back, I give you back certain answers for your questions, your lab work is going to be literally entirely invalid. So you can see now the problem. If you don't really get my help as a neuroscientist, you have no luck. You have no chance. You can't say anything on representing me and so on. I think there is in AI age, there are so many other confusions, but look, there's no reason to be afraid. And people really have to read neuroscience if they can. And they've come up with their own conclusions. I'm not really giving any conclusion to be embraced by anyone. I'm just telling you my experience hasn't shown me that neuroscience somehow is a threat to substance dualism or something like that. No, substance dualism is not based on neuroscientific conclusions.
That's okay. That's good. Yeah. And just for those who, because we've mentioned substance dualism here, and even though I haven't read it yet, I feel confident in probably recommending JP and Brandon Rickabaw's new book on that, because I'm sure I heard the talk, so I know that it's going to be very, very robust defense, explication and defense of substance dualism, which again, not just, I think, the most common sense view, the most intuitive view across cultures and time, but also the one that simply matches up best with the scriptural data we have. Okay, but now we just, you talked about saying substance dualism being, again, there are two types of substances: a physical substance and an immaterial substance. Okay, and we won't go into any further detail on that. But now, okay, so we talked. You sort of ended with sort of what neuroscience can do, what it doesn't do, and of course all the different methods and theories that are put out by neuroscientists. And the idea, I think, that there's any sort of consensus here is also going to be debunked pretty quickly. But neuroscience is also one of those areas that often gets referenced when it comes to AI, right? I think artificial intelligence. Now, you made give some insights and concerns about the type of AI that is now emerging. I don't maybe like that term, that's being created, that's being developed, and some of the concerns about it. Maybe I don't know where to start with this. What you might say, like, is there anything we need to debunk first about what AI is or can become? Because people will think like we can invent actual conscious life or something, and I think that's sort of obviously just metaphysically out of bounds. But why don't you start off with AI and what it's not, but then maybe what is some of the things that it is and that it can be, and why we need to be really aware of that.
Okay, there's a lot to talk about AI, but I think, as you've said, we don't really have time to get into all sorts of things. But here are some interesting aspects for philosophers like me when it comes to AI. AI comes in two major categories. Let's say weak AI and strong AI. So the weak AI is like all the gadgets that we're enjoying, computers and smartphones and the rest. They are meant to serve us, and they are meant to help us accomplish things and so on. There aren't philosophical agendas attached to them, to kind of these kinds of gadgets labeled and categorized under weak AI. Things really shift very, very fast when it comes to strong AI. Strong AI from the get-go is intended to establish the superiority of computers to human beings, or gadgets to human beings. And in fact, to show that human beings not only will be inferior to computer gadgets in the future, robotic entities or objects and something like that, but simply to show that there isn't that much special thing about us. Why are we getting worked up saying that we are special creatures and different and so on? And I think the attempt is to show that, yes, we are not special, and we can prove that. And how can we do that? Through creating such objects objects and gadgets. And how can we show that? Here is it, how the way to show. So human beings are not simply physical objects, simply kind of walking around and wondering about nothing and so on. Human beings are profoundly gifted creatures. Imagine how the capacity, the mental capacity you have puts you in a different place relative to mosquito, relative to a rat, relative to a cow or sheep or goat or something like that. All of these animals and organisms are not having this kind of discussion, for example, right now, right? If you bring your dog and if your dog sits beside you, what I say would make no sense to your dog. What you ask me makes no sense to your dog, and so on. Your dog is going to be bored to death, right? Doesn't comprehend anything, and so on. You and I are having this kind of conversation, but imagine the molecules that composed the body of a dog are exactly the same molecules or particles that composed your body as well. So there's something unique about you. What we call this the power of the mind, right? Yeah. So because of that, we do a lot. We have accomplished a lot, and we are unlike so many other living organisms. So human beings are, I'm sorry to say that, is special creatures, right? Sorry, we have to swallow that pill, right? Well, in the strong AI community, people who defend a strong AI, trying to unravel and do that, right? There isn't anything special about us. You see, take, for example, large language models, OpenAI, ChatGPT, for example. Imagine what it can do now. It gives you an impression that it can interact with you. You can ask a prompt, and the response that you get is going to be exactly what we're doing here. You're asking me a question, that's a prompt, and I'm giving you a set of answers and something like that. That's the kind of conversation that you're going to have with OpenAI systems. So these systems will be upgraded from time to time. They will be more complicated and more complicated and more complicated. A book actually came out not too long ago by Ray Kurzweil, another huge name in Singularity and so on. So he published in 1994, I think, Singularity is Near, right? The current book he published is entitled Singularity is Nearer. So he is predicting that in 2029, computers will be almost on at the same level in at least certain categories in terms of their smartness level. But in 2045, something bigger could happen. Like we might end up being merged with computers. Yeah. So he is now looking ahead for the time when human beings will be merged with computers, like half computers, half human beings, like a kind of hybrid species. Yeah. Hybrid species. So that's the prediction. So now we are in the territory of ontology. Now we are in the territory of metaphysics, right? And then the prediction of Kurzweil is that we will live forever. So we will defeat death, we will defeat disease, and the rest. Okay, all of these things will happen according to these people. Now, if you look into this very, very carefully, the assertion, the metaphysical assertion, without going in other things, let me give you like this. Okay, now people are spending hours and hours. Hundreds of engineers are working like on this software and writing programs and writing algorithms, and it's taking a lot of effort, right? A lot of time, a lot of ingenuity, and a lot of talent from all over the world. Okay. Now they have produced X, let's say a computer device. Looking at that, people are saying, you are superior to me. What is being forgotten in the process is, what did it take for this gadget to be where it is? What did it take for this gadget to do what it's doing? Whose talent did it take? Whose ingenuity did it take? Whose creativity did it take? And so on. Look, I have a model in my research. I'm calling it N+1 model. The N+1 model is a mathematical model grounded in what we call functions and math. So I don't want to get into the details, but anyway, here is in the simplest version, this is what my model actually attempts to say. N+1. For any given step humans take n, the +1 happens by necessity. In other words, they are one step ahead. which means n will never catch up with n plus 1. In other words, whatever the computers or robots end up doing as a result of human beings kind of upgrading their computational capacities, human beings are always one step ahead ontologically. In other words,
I see what you're saying.
Human beings are ontologically superior to the gadgets.
The thing that is derivative from the causal source can never catch up to the thing that causes it to be in existence.
For your listeners, let's without bracketing aside those people who do not believe in the existence of God, but I'm just speaking to those people who are sympathetic with respect to the existence of God, or at least theists in general who embrace the existence of God. Okay. Do you think there will come a time for theists to declare, now we've done XYZ, our creator created us, but now no more, we're ahead of you?
Yeah. No, I mean that's nonsense. It's just nonsense. It's literal nonsense if you think through that.
It's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
God, if there is God, if such a being created you, such a being is necessarily ontologically superior to you. You have no luck, no chance, even if you create something ex nihilo. The buck stops with the entity that created you.
Yeah. From which
it took that entity for you to be able to have the capacities you have, and then to put them to a good use or to a bad use. Mm-hmm. So it's literally contradiction in terms for you to say, oh, look, I have done X, Y, Z, then you're no longer my superior buddy, but I am just shoulder to shoulder. I'm ahead of you, and you will be my pet. We're not going to be able to say that to God, because there is a metaphysical blockage, metaphysical dead end that we will never be able to tear it down. Yeah. If you accept this theological example, again, I'm just addressing people who are sympathetic when it comes, to the existence of God. If this rings true, in the case of computers, why can't the same thing is true? Yeah. Why can't it be true? Because computers, look, right now, imagine robots are not all of a sudden they are like coming up with their own fresh idea and say, look, if you leave automated robots in Amazon warehouse, let's say there are thousands of them, right? If you leave them there without turning them on, come back after 1,000 years.
There they will be, having done nothing. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Put human beings in warehouse, don't shackle them up. Don't tie them up against the wall or something like that. Close the doors and the outlets and everything else, but they are free to roam within that warehouse. Come back after 50 years or 20 years or even 2 weeks. You haven't been giving them food. You haven't been giving them water to drink and so on. What do you think those people would immediately contemplate?
How to survive.
They would like to escape, right?
Yeah. Or escape, yeah.
They will come up with a way to get out, to do that perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. So human beings are not machines. They are always kind of in their own universe and so on. So I think that's the first thing, the ontological superiority.
We're viewing ourselves as machines because we're living in a machine age. Right? So we're applying something that we've made and can see and look at, and we're just saying, well, maybe we're just like the types of things we create. Yeah.
I tell you that how good we are in plagiarizing from nature. Okay, let me explain that idea. In computational theory, people who are producing these gadgets, they say, look, these gadgets are extremely fast. They accomplish computational tasks at a much higher speed than you would ever be able to do, right? Okay. Let me ask you a very simple question. Who did that?
Yeah.
Designers.
Right.
Designers. Which means they are confusing, they are confusing their own handiwork, their own achievements. They are reifying it as if it had never been done by them, and they are looking at it as an object of worship.
Okay, yeah, right, right. I mean, okay. So it was a simple thought that I had several years ago when I was in the philosophy of mind class, and we were reading all this literature, the Enigma machine, and all this stuff that was relating, or no, sorry, the Turing tests and everything.
Turing machine, yeah.
Where in the literature is constantly referencing, just talking about the brain as a computer. The brain is a computer. The brain's a machine. It's like a Turing machine, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's not. Our machines are like the brain, maybe, but the brain is not like the machine that was made, right?
Exactly.
And so we're,
go ahead, finish your thought.
No, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Look, they are putting the cart before the horse. And in doing so, they are plagiarizing as follows. So you have this model idea, let's say connectionism, for example, like, the output layer, the hidden layer, the input layer, hidden layer, output layer, and so on. They have these nodes and they connect each node with everything else. That imitating how our neurons are connected to each other and so on and so forth. Okay. You have this model from nature, from your own, let's say, nervous system and so on. And you came up with a toy version of that. You want to reduce this to that and say there's nothing unique about this because we came up with a toy version of that. It's a little bit surprising to me how you can actually define the brain as a computer, because what you have as a model was taken from, it's an imitation, simulated version of how your actually brain actually looks like. So now, but they want to treat the toy version as if it is just somehow anointed and there's absolutely nothing different between this and that. But you got this model because of the capacity you have. So there is kind of a, you see, this is a conflict of worldview, by the way, as JP argues. It has nothing to do with science and with the way things are. It has to do with naturalism and what you're doing. So you just like planning, I said.
Well, and there's a sort of there are sort of like embedded sort of theological hopes and desires in these things. I'm reading a book right now. We've had this gentleman on as well. His name's Carl Teichrieb, and he wrote a book called, and he tracks, he's been going for decades to a lot of these, Parliament of World Religions, these globalist movements, these movements of one faith movements, these interfaith movements, a lot of them, the transhumanist movements. And, you see all of these sort of salvific desires in people, right? Transformational desires that we all have because we are frustrated by and disappointed with our humanness, right? And so, and then these are, and this is what we say, well, this happens when, we come into relationship with our creator and we're transformed into a new creation through Christ. But that desire's in everybody. And if it's not through coming back into relationship with our actual creator, and I think Jacques Ellul wrote a lot about this, is when, then what we want to do is we want to use our own human contrivances, our techne, to try and achieve the same goals, right? And this is just the transhumanist sort of movement. And, he references Kurzweil in that book quite a bit as, the idea is like, well, we will make the thing that will transform us into and relieve us of all of our human inabilities and restrictions and limitations, right? We will just make that through technology. But as you point out, metaphysically, this is nonsensical, right? This is just now, Now, maybe what we should say is, though, but that doesn't mean we might not make things that can have dramatic effects, right? And drastic consequences. So I don't know if you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we're already moving into that era, by the way. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned transhumanism, and transhumanism is actually a reaction against human biology. So
Yeah.
human biology is badly designed, and it kind of makes us be susceptible to all sorts of diseases, limitations, and so on. We have to disentangle ourselves from that shackle by the power of technology and actually achieve digital immortality, for example, by extracting your mind and put it on a kind of a
mind mapping and
terms of
whatever.
electronic brain and so on and so forth. But here are a bigger practical, there are practical problems associated with AI that really concern me a lot.
Okay.
Besides metaphysical issues, that some of them we touched upon, but maybe some other time we can go into deeper analysis. I think now they are proposing, especially in the age of generative AI, to have electronic tutors in the future. Rather than human beings, like, let's say, teaching your children, why don't we hire electronic tutors? Why? Electronic tutors are precise, they don't disappoint kids, they don't yell at kids, they don't get angry, and just, that's it. So it's a very conducive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And how about electronic lawyers in the future? Rather than you hiring a human being to represent you, you can hire electronic lawyer, and it will be the electronic lawyer will have its opportunity to make the case on your behalf in the courtroom in the future. Kind of some of the proposals. And how about in the future, electronic sermons and preachings might be common, because some churches are already using chatbot, and I'm against that. And you can make so many things, like professors might lose jobs, easily. I mean, if universities are not careful, you can just upload the lectures and then just press the button on, and you don't have to have so many professors. What I'm saying is, look, if we multiply the spheres that generative AI could potentially affect in a negative way if we're not careful, if there's no proper regulation and oversight, is immense. There's not a single sphere or sector is immune to the negative impact of generative AI. For example, within a Christian circle, for example, specifically, the concept of the body of Christ will lose its meaning, because the whole point of the body of Christ is for you and for me to be in each other's physical presence. Okay, unless there is a very good reason not to, but as a matter of principle, as a matter of practical necessity, I want to listen to your problems in your physical presence and so on. And so that is going to be a thing of the past if we're not careful. So rather than making a trip, let's say, to Africa or Europe for on missions work or something like that, you might easily you say, Zoom is available. I don't have to hop on the plane, and I can just send a few money here and there. Do you think people are hungry for your money and resources? Do you think your money and resources are going to shape someone's life? Can you really leave a lasting impact in someone's life by sending them equipments and so on? I think we shouldn't deceive ourselves. So generative AI, if we're not careful, it kills education. I know people are having a love affair with it, but here is my concern. It completely wipes out your skills. And there is actually a worry right now that people are not even writing a coherent email and analyzing a single paragraph, and kids are having difficult times and comprehending complicated notions and analyzing them and so on. It completely affects your skills. And I have actually expressed on one of the videos that I did on ChatGPT sort of analysis, all of these things. When I write paper, I spend so many hours contemplating, thinking, and suffering. That is a suffering worth absorbing.
Right.
As a matter of principle, worth absorbing. Two of the two important arguments right now. Oh, we save time and we are productive. Both of those reasons are meaningless in the context of education. You can be productive by having the shallowest possible understanding of anything that you're doing. Maybe you're downloading information from different sites and putting it together, making it cosmetic changes, and you have your degree, but you cannot even coherently explain yourself. So productivity can come through shallowest possible way. Saving time is good for nothing if I haven't understood the inner working of calculus. If I can't confidently explain to you calculus without having this mental crutch that I call this, chat GPT stuff,
Yeah.
what's the point? What's the
Yeah.
point? You see, in the context of education, I think it really affects that. In churches that are using chatbot, they should think twice. When I call to your church, or when someone calls to your church, why would you completely, why would I not talk to a human being? Just
Right.
spontaneously to have that conversation. Why chatbot? You see the reason? Productivity, saving time. Both are lame reasons. Down the road, what this does is incrementally and implicitly, like a cancer developing in someone's body. First, you don't notice it. Over time, it's growing, growing,
Yeah.
growing, growing. At some point, bam! It's time for you to, drop dead or get help. When you go to get help, oh, sorry, stage 4,
Too
stage
late.
5. Sorry. You see, people might laugh at my comment right now. It completely destabilizes the unity of the body of Christ. It makes people into kind of quasi zombies. You will have less courage, less confidence, less motivation, and less interest to be in people's physical presence. Be
Look,
challenged by them
yeah.
and to challenge them. And
Yeah.
we're going to lose this virtue. We're going to lose this biblically extremely respected, can I say again, virtue down the road.
Yeah.
And modernization, imitating the modern world at the expense of ignoring what is the most important thing with respect to what you believe is absolutely, it has some sort of repercussions. And I think I have so many worries, but
Yeah.
I'm not against technology, by the way.
Yes.
I think
No.
you and
No.
I completely agree, and your listeners, no one is saying that you
I mean,
have to dump
we
technology.
are
And
using it right here.
I'm
Although I
using it.
would,
We're using it
say,
right now.
yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, and we'll end on this note of generative AI and how it sort of disembodies us, right? I mean, that is certainly a huge concern. Many people are bringing this up, and I think you've really sharpened that concern in what you just said. And I'll present myself as sort of, I don't want to call myself a victim of this, but as I'm like you. I mean, there's about 50 books over on the other side of the table right here. And, a lot of my time is in isolation, reading, researching, and reading physical books, but a lot more time spent online or doing virtual things. And I'm always a very social, extroverted person. But I've even noticed over the years, especially starting around the COVID lockdowns, where for a whole year, we were all in, it does seem like over time it has become more difficult for me to be in people's physical presences and want to be there and want to be with them for longer periods of time. It's almost like I have to get pulled back into this mode of intersubjectivity or whatever we want to call it, or just being with folks, and realize, and there's this sense of like, oh, I got to get back to my computer. I got to get back to my device because there's something there I need to check or do, or it's more interesting. And like, so I realize it in my own soul. This is a problem. That's not the way it's supposed to. That's not the way it's supposed to be. We've got to be very careful about that. And I'll just put there's a fascinating, this was a story not written by a Christian, but E.M. Forrester, who was one of, I think, what was it called? The Bloomsbury Group back in the early 20th century. I think he wrote this story in 1909. But some of these guys, they had these almost, visionary sort of experiences of what the future might be like. I mean, dystopian futures. And he wrote a book called The Machine Stops, right? Where it's a short story where everybody is living underground and they all have these, what he calls hot plates in front of them. And the whole idea of the story is all of human experience is mediated bodily. Everybody's in their own little underground cell. There's no, it's the whole idea is to eliminate first person experience or
Yeah.
unmediated experience.
Yeah.
Everything is mediated through some piece of human contrivance or technology, so that there's
Right.
no real genuine kind of first person experiences in that sense,
Right. So
and
this
yeah,
So this is a denaturalization. I actually
yeah,
give another interview to some, podcast people. Denaturalization is the way to go, right? This denaturalizing everything technology, like, kind of detaching you from your own nature. Look, social life, being in someone's presence is your nature. You're a social animal. When you go against that, the science is against you. For example, neuroscientists these days are completely recommending, more than they recommend, like, take this pill or that, have good friends,
yeah.
be around good
Friendship.
people, and so on.
What
That is
Viktor
a key
Frankl
for your
said.
mental health. Yeah.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
you go to, let's say, if you have traveled recently, I've been traveling a lot to speak in different places. This struck me a lot. I was going to Chicago and I got into the plane. Guess what? While people are kind of boarding the plane, the people who already sat on chairs, not a single person is talking to anyone. Not a single. Absolute silence. You will hear a pin drop.
yeah,
Honestly, I have seen this so many times. Imagine as a Christian, for example, or look. Let's say you're not even a Christian. You already missed out on lots of opportunities to get to know people, and maybe someone is in dire situation. Maybe you could have encouraged that person, or other person, people could have encouraged you, and like,
yeah,
look, there's none of that is happening. Look at train stations or bus stations. No one is talking to anyone. Already, this denaturalization process has already taken place, and is taking place at a much deeper level right now. And I think, look, civil discourse. I'll end with this. Civil discourse. Do you think in our culture, in a broader culture these days, people have stamina to be challenged by another person who is challenging their view, and they are there to give a proper response after they hear that criticism and objections? No. It's a yelling match, shouting match.
yeah,
People have zero interest. You take my view, and no matter what it is, even if you have good reasons, you shouldn't open your mouth to say anything against my view. I am right, you're right, everyone is right. Let's have a kumbaya moment and have a party.
right,
We cannot live in such a world. Look, intellectual humility means for me to stand uh, with utter confidence to be corrected by you when my view is not right. And I should respect you, I should thank you, I should treat you a Starbucks coffee latte or whatever you like. Look, the fact that you reject my view or you challenge my view does not mean you are my enemy. The fact that I do the same thing to you does not mean I hate you. It means iron sharpens iron.
hmm,
That is how we can grow intellectually. That's the only way. We cannot have any view and assume every view is unchallengeable. In that case, academic education is valueless. Why are we? Academic evaluation is completely valueless. Especially in philosophy, there is absolutely no view that is safe. Not even philosophy itself, let alone to pick out one view. Philosophy is not safe. Philosophy critiques itself. And we have in philosophy what we call meta-philosophy, metaphysics, and so
right,
on, meta-ethics, and so on. This is critiquing what philosophy does, critiquing what metaphysics does. Look,
yeah,
civil discourse, the ability and confidence that we need to have to correct other people, to be corrected by other people, are a fundamental demonstration of our nature, fundamental, rational nature that Aristotle told us a long time ago. We are losing that already. Then what? Think the scenario after we've literally lost this capacity forever. Then how can we actually live together as human beings? Because we are rational creatures.
yeah,
We see, we notice things, and we know we spot errors and so on. How are we going to get along with each other? Now technology is actually making this even harder and harder. And tech companies Look, they are telling you be a couch potato. Don't think for yourself. If you need any response, any answer, any information, hop on your gadget and just enter the prompt. Don't
Right.
think for yourself. Don't contemplate. Don't come up with novel ideas. No, we do the creativity on your behalf, and your job is buy what we create and invent. Have a good time. This will create down the road what I call information deficit. If you're not depositing money in your bank, if you're really taking away what you have, like nothing is coming in, right?
Right.
So in the future, I don't want to exaggerate this beyond necessity, but if people are not thinking for themselves, I don't want to craft an email to send it to you by asking ChatGPT. I have never opened ChatGPT. I will never open ChatGPT. Look, it's an insult to myself. Look, as a philosopher, are you kidding me? I'm going to ask a machine to write for me an essay? I
Yeah.
would rather do something than do that. So look, you need to think for yourself.
Yeah.
God has given you this mind for you to use it.
Yeah.
And use technology in
Well,
a responsible way. But
it
I just reject this idea that our natural capacities should be denaturalized. I reject that.
it seems to eliminate this what we you say, if we are, at least as Christians and maybe theists more broadly, claiming that we're made in the image of God, who is creator, and that creativity is clearly a communicable attribute, because that's what we've been talking about here, is human creativity. This sort of diminishes that attribute in us. It diminishes us as creative beings. As you said, if you're not investing anything into the bank, but you're just drawing out from what is sort of there, then at some point, you're not actually. I mean, you're not create when you type in some prompts to a algorithm and get a letter spit out. You haven't created anything. You haven't exercised the attribute of creativity or the capacity of creativity. You just haven't. I mean, um yeah, I mean, well, look, this is this has been good. We've gone on for a while, I mean, and I know we could go further, and we'll have to, maybe we'll have to do it again and come back to dive a little deeper in some of the things that we just touched on. But I would say that we really have to continue thinking about these things. We got to be intentional about not using generative AI to the point of where it really starts to affect our human relationships. I think you're absolutely right about the dangers to us as a body of Christ, because we need to be together. And I just say is like, well, next time we meet, let's make sure we're out for breakfast,
Yeah.
or a nice dinner,
Yeah.
instead of doing Zoom or here over the computers. So we'll
Let me
definitely.
give you one
Yeah.
powerful argument, at least
Yeah.
for me, and then end with this. Like,
Yeah.
look, if you take the whole concept of incarnation, why do you think that Christ decided to come to Earth? And he could have said to you, "Look, you guys screwed up, and okay, I understood what you did, but you're forgiven. That's it."
That's
He
right.
didn't he didn't do that, right? So he came here, he lived among us, and he did everything that we did, hungry, thirsty, fearful, and the rest goes on and on and on. Look, that is for me a paradigm example of why we should surrender the unity and the importance of being in each other's presence.
Right.
We should take that from incarnational standpoint, and I think it's that serious to me because during the pandemic, for example, in the United States and around the world, many people became mentally ill.
Yeah.
They are antsy, fidgety. They didn't like to be hunkered down at home, and they were rebellious, and rightly so. That
Right.
shows you
Yeah.
that is your nature. You want to hang out with people, right?
Yeah.
That's your nature. You're not created to be at home and just play with gadgets and so on.
Well, and
Right
I made
now,
this.
we have a huge
Yeah,
problem.
I made the point on another pod. I mean, that type of lockdown, which was very scary because it was global. I mean, it like everybody almost did the same thing, which is very scary, right? But I, I think, if we didn't have, or well, it's separated. What one guy said, the laptop class from the lower classes, right? Those of us who have laptops and can do Zoom,
Yeah,
and here's where technology is. At least we could still interact in some, even though mediated way.
yeah,
But if we did not have that technology, I think we just would have never accepted lockdowns. The only thing that
exactly.
I think even allowed for the lockdowns to happen without just total absolute rebellion and rejection of them was the fact that a certain number of us in the West and the other part, Asia and other parts of the more city, could sit in our homes and be surrounded by these appearances of presence, or not appearances, but these stand-ins,
Yeah,
these proxies for, to use a theological term, real
yeah,
presence.
yeah.
But that's where we got to be careful, because they are just that. They are proxies for a real presence. They are not real presence. And
Exactly.
so,
So, by the
yeah.
way, we should be careful now. Generative AI, the pandemic is behind us, as far as we can tell. The generative AI, the gadgets that are coming out are going to imprison you because they will take away your interest to be in anyone's physical presence. And you can
Yeah.
just look. Here is one example that I didn't mention: virtual reality. Virtual reality is now being touted by some philosophers as if it's not it's indistinguishable from reality as you know it. So you shouldn't treat it in a fictional sense. Virtual reality should be treated as if it's absolutely real. You shouldn't use as if language. It is just real. Events in virtual reality are as real as events in this reality or something like that. So now if you have that technology, you are going to develop every imaginable kind of attachment in that virtual reality or virtual space, not treating it fictionally, treating it as if it is absolutely real. You can have a love affair, you can have romantic attachment, all sorts of attachments, and so on, with social attachment with the characters, and so on. So your value as a human being diminishes. People will have less interest to spend time with you, and they will have more interest to spend with those characters, and so on. Look,
Yeah.
some people who listen to this might say, oh, you're exaggerating. Look, I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not against technology. And I thank God, actually, for people who develop these technologies, because they are using their creativity, and the creativity is a reflection of God's image, and I give them A plus. I have no problem with that. But look, rationalizing our behavior, okay, is not a solution.
Yeah.
Nothing will happen. We shouldn't think about this. Blah blah blah. Look, we have tons of examples of that kind of complacency. It's landed us in so many bad places, and it will do the same when it comes to
We keep
technology.
saying, we keep saying we're going to, it brings up another point, that one thing in all of the transhumanist literature that I've read so far, it's all about increasing only a certain, our our power, right? It's all about the increasing human power, its extension of life, possibly to immortality. It's the ability to have increased numbers of types of experiences they want, so on and so forth. What's never brought into the conversation is, what kind of moral creatures are we? I've yet to see the Ray Kurtz. I mean, maybe he writes about it in the book. I'm only reading about him secondhand, but I've never seen but wait, when we create these things as sinful and morally wicked creatures, we are also creating things that will have that aspect of us in them. And, you know, it's interesting because there are older science fiction tales. I mean, you think Frankenstein, maybe, or even that old movie, what was it called, with Forbidden Planet?
Yeah.
That even though it presented in a Freudian sort of way, that no matter what that we're going to create something that could be like us, evil, evil and cruel and fallen and wicked and so on and so forth. But I don't, so but the emphasis, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out it was in the beginning of The Problem of Pain, in the pagan mind sort of just worships power, the numinous power, but it was the theistic, the Jewish, the scriptures, is revealed that power and the moral component, justice, righteousness, goodness, right, are one and the same, right? They're in the nature of God, right? But yeah, so anyways, well, next time we meet, breakfast is on me. We will eat
All right.
we will eat real food, drink real
But
coffee.
I'm picky. I'm vegetarian, so
Okay,
I'll let you know
well,
what works for me.
maybe you can come up with a diet for me, because my cardiologist has said I need to go to a strict vegetarian diet. So
Right.
that's good. Well, we'll have oatmeal if we can do that,
Right.
or something. But
Mm-hmm.
Mihretu Guta,
Absolutely.
thank you so much. We've covered a lot of space, but it's great. Super important issues. Thanks for taking the time. 2 hours. Thank you so much for spending the time with me here, even if virtually. So, all right. God bless you.
Our book, by the
Yeah.
way, our book came out. The book I edited with Scott Ray, Taking Persons Seriously. It tackles some of the issues that we talked about: transhumanism, the non-neutrality of technology, and I think encourage your readers, if they
Yes. We
have
will
any
link to all of
desire
those
to have it.
books. And these are the issues I think that we need to more good Christian thinkers and people to be engaging with, because it's here. It's upon us, and we have to deal with the reality of it, or the virtual reality of it, if you want to put it that way. All right. Thank you, Mihretu. God bless you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Thanks.